You wake up on Christmas Eve, 1827, and the house is already empty. Not the kind of empty that comes with silence. The kind that vibrates with absence. Your parents left before dawn. Your older siblings, too. The door closed softly, like they didn't want to wake you, but you know better. They wanted you awake. They wanted you to understand. Because tonight, you're staying home, alone. The candle on the doorstep is still burning when you walk outside. It's a thick tallow thing, the kind that smells like rendered fat and bad decisions. Your mother placed it there herself, right before she left. She kissed your forehead, adjusted your collar, and told you the rules. Keep the candle lit. Don't leave the house. If anyone knocks, don't answer. Then she was gone. And you're 9 years old. You stand there, barefoot on the frozen doorstep, watching the flame flicker in the wind. It's Christmas Eve in rural Sweden, which means the sun set 3 hours ago and won't rise again for another 16. The snow glows blue under the moonlight. The forest beyond your yard is a wall of black pines, their branches heavy with ice. You've been told stories about the forest, about what lives there, about what comes out on Christmas Eve, when families abandon their homes and travel to the nearest church for midnight mass. But those are just stories, right? The candle flame dips. You cup your hand around it, feeling the heat lick your palm. This is your job tonight. Keep the flame alive. Prove you're old enough. Prove you're brave enough. Prove you won't let the house go dark. Because a dark house on Christmas Eve? That's an invitation. You step back inside. The cold follows you. The floorboards creak under your weight, each sound amplified by the emptiness. The kitchen still smells like the cinnamon bread your mother baked this morning, but the scent is fading, replaced by the mineral tongue of frost seeping through the walls. You sit by the window and watch the road. No one's coming back until dawn. The tradition is older than your grandparents, older than the church in the village. On Christmas Eve, every family in the parish leaves their home and walks sometimes miles through snow to attend midnight mass. It's not optional. It's not a choice. You go, or you're not part of the community. You go, or you don't exist. But someone has to stay behind. Usually, it's the eldest child. Old enough to be trusted, young enough to still believe in rules. The job is simple. Keep the house protected. Keep the candle burning. Keep the darkness out. They don't tell you what happens if you fail. They don't have to. You've heard the stories. Every child in the village has. The house that went dark on Christmas Eve and burned down by morning. The boy who blew out his candle and was found frozen in the yard, his eyes open, staring at nothing. The girl who left her post and came back to find every piece of furniture rearranged, every door opened, every window shattered. No one died. But no one was the same either. The candle on the doorstep flickers again. You can see it through the window, a single point of light in an ocean of black. You wonder if it's magic. You wonder if it's just wax and wick in the desperate hope of people who needed something to believe in when winter tried to kill them. You wonder if it matters. The clock on the wall ticks. You count the hours. 7 until your family returns. 7 hours of sitting in the cold, watching the candle, listening to the house settle and creak and breathe around you. You're not afraid. You're not, but you don't move from the window. And you don't stop watching the road. Because somewhere between the church and your house, between tradition and survival, between the stories and the silence, something started. A myth, a belief, a fear that didn't need a name because everyone already knew what it was. The idea that a child, alone on Christmas Eve, was guarding more than just a house. They were guarding the line between the living and whatever waited in the dark. And that candle? That candle was the only thing keeping that line from disappearing. You press your face against the cold glass. Your breath fogs the window. Outside, the flame still burns. You tell yourself it's enough. You tell yourself your parents will come home. You tell yourself this is just tradition, just one night, just a test you have to pass. But deep down, in the part of you that still believes in monsters, you know the truth. You're not guarding the house. You're guarding yourself. And the night has only just begun. The wind picks up outside. You hear it howling through the eaves, rattling the shutters, testing every crack in the walls. The candle flame bends but doesn't break. You watch it dance, mesmerized by its fragility, terrified by its importance. If this already feels too close to every childhood fear you've ever had, subscribe now because it gets worse. The house creaks. Not the normal settling sound you're used to. Something different. Something deliberate. Like footsteps on the floor above you. But there's no one upstairs. There can't be. You're alone. You know you're alone. Your family locked every door before they left. You checked them yourself. Twice. 3 times. Every latch secure. Every window fastened. The house is sealed tight against the winter and whatever else might try to get in. But the creaking continues. Slow. Methodical. Moving from one end of the ceiling to the other. You stop breathing. Your eyes track the sound across the room. It stops directly above where you're sitting. Then nothing. Silence so complete you can hear your heartbeat. The candle outside flickers. Once, twice. The flame dips low, merely touches the wax, then rises again. Your mother's voice echoes in your memory. Keep it burning, no matter what. Let's zoom out. Sweden, 1827. The tail end of the Little Ice Age, when winter wasn't a season, it was a siege. Crops failed. Livestock froze. People starved quietly, behind closed doors, because complaining didn't make the cold go away. Christmas wasn't a holiday. It was survival, and survival required rituals. The tradition of leaving children home alone on Christmas Eve wasn't cruelty. It was pragmatism wrapped in superstition. Families traveled to church because the church demanded it. Miss Midnight Mass, and you weren't just a sinner, you were a social outcast. No communion. No community support. No help when your roof collapsed under the weight of snow. But someone had to stay behind. Because an empty house on Christmas Eve, that was a target. Not for thieves. Something worse. Swedish folklore is a catalog of things that want to hurt you. Trolls that steal children. Miss house spirits that demand respect and offerings, or they'll curdle your milk and break your tools. Tomt, the farm guardians that could bless or curse your land depending on how you treated them. And then there were the miling spirits of unbaptized children, doomed to wander, screaming, looking for someone to carry them to consecrated ground. Christmas Eve was when the veil thinned, when the dead got close, when the forest stopped being just trees and became something that watched. So you left a child behind, not to protect the house from ghosts, but to prove the house wasn't empty, to keep a flame burning, to show that life still claimed this space, even if everyone else had left. It was a test and a sacrifice, because if something did come, the child was the only one there to face it. The practice wasn't unique to Sweden. Across Scandinavia, rural Germany, parts of Poland, and northern France, the same pattern emerged. Families attended midnight mass. Children stayed home. Candles burned on doorsteps. Silence filled the villages. And every year, stories spread. A boy in Norway heard footsteps on the roof. A girl in Denmark saw a face in the window that wasn't hers. A child in Finland opened the door to find a woman in white standing in the snow, asking to be let in. The ones who obeyed the rules survived. The ones who didn't, they were found the next morning, unharmed but changed. They stopped speaking. They stopped eating. They sat by the fire and stared at nothing, like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. But here's the thing. No one ever asked what they saw, because asking meant acknowledging it was real. And if it was real, that meant the candle wasn't just tradition. It was the only thing keeping the dark from swallowing you whole. Back in your house, the clock ticks louder. You've been sitting by the window for an hour now, and your legs are numb. The cold has seeped through your wool socks, through your skin, into your bones. You want to move. You want to stoke the fire, wrap yourself in a blanket, close your eyes for just a minute. But you don't, because the candle outside is burning lower. You can see it through the frost-fogged glass. The flame is smaller now, barely clinging to the wick. If it goes out, you'll have to relight it, which means opening the door, which means stepping into the night, which means breaking the rules. Your mother's voice echoes in your head. Don't leave the house. But she didn't say what happens if the candle dies. You stand. Your knees crack. The floorboards groan under your weight. And for a moment, you freeze, listening. Waiting for the sound to fade. Waiting to make sure nothing heard you. Nothing answers. You walk to the door, slowly. Each step deliberate. Your hand hovers over the latch. The metal is so cold it burns. You hesitate. Outside, the wind picks up. The candle flame bends, flickers, holds. You breathe, and you step away from the door. Not tonight. Not yet. The candle is still burning. The rules still hold. You're still safe. But in the back of your mind, a question takes root. What if the candle goes out? What if the rules aren't enough? What if the thing your parents are protecting you from isn't outside but already in? You turn back to the window, and for the first time, you notice the shadow. Not outside, inside, in the reflection of the glass, standing behind you. Your breath catches. The shadow doesn't move. It's just there. A dark shape in the corner of your vision. Tall. Too tall. Taller than any person should be. You tell yourself it's the firelight playing tricks. The flames casting strange shapes on the walls. But when you turn around to look directly at the corner, there's nothing there. Just empty space. Just shadows that belong. But when you look back at the window, back at the reflection, the shape is still there. Still standing. Still watching. The candle outside burns lower. The wax melts down the sides, pooling on the frozen doorstep. You have maybe 2 hours before it dies completely. 2 hours to figure out what to do. 2 hours to decide if you're brave enough to open that door and face whatever is waiting. Or if you're going to let the flame die and see what happens when the darkness wins. You don't turn around. Not immediately. Because turning around means confirming what you saw. And confirming it means it's real. And confirming it means it's real. And if it's real, then every story you've ever been told about Christmas Eve stops being folklore and starts being a warning you ignored. So you stand there, frozen, staring at the glass, at the reflection of the room behind you, the fireplace, the table, the empty chairs, and the shape. It's not solid. Not exactly. It's more like a distortion. A place where the light bends wrong. Where the shadows pull deeper than they should. It's tall. Taller than your father. Taller than any man you've ever seen. And it's standing in the corner by the hearth, where the firelight should reach but doesn't. You close your eyes. Count to 3. Open them. The shape is gone. You exhale. Your breath mists in the cold air. You tell yourself it was nothing. A trick of the light. A smudge on the glass. Your mind playing games because you're tired and scared and alone. You tell yourself this. You almost believe it, but your hands are shaking. The rules of Christmas Eve were never written down. They didn't need to be. Every child learned them the same way, whispered by older siblings, hinted at by grandparents, encoded in the tight smile your mother gave you before she left. Rule 1. Keep the candle burning. Rule 2. Don't leave the house. Rule 3. If you hear a knock, don't answer. Rule 4. If you hear your name, don't respond. Rule 5. If you see something, close your eyes. That last one was never said out loud, but you knew it. Everyone knew it because seeing something meant acknowledging it. And acknowledging it gave it permission. Permission to what? No one ever clarified, but you're starting to understand. The tradition of leaving children home on Christmas Eve wasn't about protecting the house. It was about protecting the family. Because whatever came out on Christmas Eve, whatever walked through the snow, whatever scratched at the doors, whatever called your name in your mother's voice, it needed an invitation. And a child, alone, afraid, desperate for company, that was the easiest invitation to give. So the rules existed to keep you from inviting it in. Keep the candle burning. Stay inside. Don't answer. Don't respond. Don't look. Simple. Except you just looked. You looked at the reflection. You saw the shape. You acknowledged it. And now it knows you're here. The fire in the hearth pops. A log shifts. Sparks rise and die. You jump, spinning toward the sound, and your heart is a drum in your chest, pounding so loud you can hear it in your ears. The corner is empty. Of course it's empty. It was always empty, but the shadows feel heavier now. The darkness in the corners of the room feels deeper. And when you look back at the window, the candle outside is burning lower, much lower. The wax is melted down to a stub. The flame is a fragile thing, barely clinging to life. You have maybe an hour before it dies. And you have no more candles. Your mother took them all. Every tallow stick, every wax nub, every match. She took them to the church, because the church needed light tonight. The whole village needed light tonight. And you? You got one candle. One chance. One test. You sit back down by the window. Your legs won't stop shaking. You press your palms against your thighs, trying to steady them, but it doesn't work. The cold is inside you now, not just in your bones, in your blood, in your breath, in the space behind your ribs where your lungs should be. You're not alone. You know this. You've known it since your parents left, since the door closed, since the first shadow stretched across the floor and didn't move the way shadows should. The house is full of something that isn't you, and it's waiting. Outside, the wind howls. It sounds like voices. Dozens of them, layered over each other, rising and falling in a rhythm that almost sounds like singing. You press your face to the glass, trying to see where the sound is coming from, but the yard is empty. The road is empty. The forest is a black wall, and nothing moves. But the voices keep singing, and then, beneath the wind, you hear it. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate strikes against the door. Knock. Knock. Your breath stops. The rules flood back. Don't answer. Don't respond. Don't move. But the knocking doesn't stop. Knock. Knock. It's rhythmic. Patient. Like whoever or whatever is outside has all the time in the world. Like it knows you're listening. Like it knows you're afraid. And then, beneath the knocking, a voice. Your mother's voice. Let me in. The words hang in the air. Soft. Pleading. Exactly the way she sounds when she's cold and tired and wants to come inside. But she's not here. She's at church. Miles away. And whatever is outside, using her voice, wearing her words like a stolen coat, isn't her. You know this. But knowing doesn't make it easier. You don't move. You don't breathe. You don't even blink. Because that's your mother's voice. You'd know it anywhere. The cadence. The softness. The way she shapes your name like it's something precious. Something worth protecting. But your mother is at church. She left hours ago. She won't be back until dawn. Knock. Knock. Let me in, sweetheart. I'm cold. The voice is perfect. Too perfect. Every inflection, every pause, every breath sounds exactly like her. If you close your eyes, you'd swear she was standing on the other side of the door, shivering, waiting for you to do the right thing. But you keep your eyes open, because the rule is clear. If you hear your name, don't respond. If you hear a knock, don't answer. No matter what, the knocking stops. For a moment, there's only silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. The kind that presses against your ears and makes your heart beat the loudest thing in the world. Then the voice comes again. But it's not your mother anymore. It's your father. Why won't you open the door? Are you afraid of your own father? Your stomach turns. The voice is his. Deep. Gruff. The same tone he uses when you've done something wrong and he's trying to decide if you need punishment or just disappointment. But your father is at church, with your mother, with your siblings. They're all gone. Knock. Knock. Open the door. Now, your hands ball into fists. You dig your nails into your palms, focusing on the pain, using it to anchor yourself. Because part of you, some small, childish part, wants to believe. Wants to think maybe they came back early. Maybe something happened. Maybe they need you. But the candle is still burning, and the rules say don't answer. So you don't. The knocking stops again. This time, the silence lasts longer. You count the seconds in your head. 10, 20, 30, nothing. You let yourself breathe. Maybe it's over. Maybe whatever was out there got bored and left. Maybe the sound comes like breaking glass. You scream and stumble backward, crashing into the table, knocking over a cup that shatters on the floor. But the window is intact. Nothing's broken. The sound came from something hitting the glass. Hard, like a fist. Or a rock or something worse. You stare at the window. There's a smudge on the outside. A handprint. Pressed against the frost fog glass. 5 fingers. A palm. Perfectly formed. But the hand is too big. Much too big. And it's not leaving. The handprint just sits there, pressed against the glass. Like whatever made it is still standing outside, waiting for you to acknowledge it. You take a step back. Then another. Your heel crunches on the broken ceramic. You don't care. You can't stop looking at the handprint. And then it moves. Slowly, deliberately, the hand drags down the glass. The sound it makes wet, squeaking, wrong turns your stomach. It's not a sound a hand should make. It's the sound of something trying to be a hand. Something wearing a hand like a glove. The drag stops at the bottom of the window. And then a face appears. It's your mother's face. But it's not. The features are right. The nose. The eyes. The shape of the lips. But they're wrong. Too symmetrical. Too smooth. Like someone drew a picture of your mother from memory and got everything technically correct, but missed the thing that made it real. The face smiles. Why won't you let me in? You can't speak. Your throat is closed. Your lungs are frozen. Every survival instinct in your body is screaming at you to run, but you can't move. You're locked in place, staring at the thing wearing your mother's face. The smile widens. Too wide. The lips pull back, revealing teeth. Too many teeth. Rows and rows of them, crammed into a mouth that shouldn't fit them all. And then the face presses closer. So close the glass fogs around it. I know you're in there, it whispers. And you realize it's not trying to get in. It's waiting for you to let it in, because the rules work both ways. Whatever this thing is, it can't cross the threshold unless you invite it. It can knock. It can call. It can wear the faces of everyone you love. But it can't come inside. Not unless you open the door. Not unless you break the rules. The face pulls back. The handprint fades. The window is just a window again. Frost and darkness and nothing else. But you know it's still out there. Waiting. Testing. Learning. You back away from the window until you hit the far wall. Your legs give out, and you slide to the floor, pulling your knees to your chest. You're shaking so hard your teeth chatter. The cold is everywhere now. In your bones. In your blood. In the spaces between your thoughts. The candle outside flickers. You can see it through the window. The flame is barely there. A ghost of a light. It'll be gone soon. And when it dies, the rules might not matter anymore. Because the thing outside isn't bound by light. It's bound by permission. And you're the only one here to give it. Or refuse. Knock. 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 This time, the voice is your own. Let me in, it says. I'm so cold. The sound of your own voice, coming from outside, speaking words you didn't say, breaks something inside you. Because if it can be you, if it can wear your voice the way it wore your mother's face and your father's authority, then what's left that's really yours? You curl tighter, making yourself as small as possible, and you wait. Wait for the candle to die. Wait for dawn. Wait for something to change. Because you can't keep doing this. You can't keep sitting here, listening to the thing outside try every voice, every plea, every trick to make you open that door. You don't recognize your own voice. Not at first. It sounds like you. Same pitch. Same nervous tremor you get when you're trying not to cry. But there's something underneath it. Something hollow. Like an echo bouncing around inside a well. Pretending to be the thing that made it. Please, the voice says. I'm scared out here. You press your hands over your ears. It doesn't help. The voice isn't coming from outside anymore. It's coming from everywhere. From the walls. From the floor. From the space between your thoughts. It's inside the house now. Not physically. There's no shape, no shadow, no thing standing in the room with you. But it's here. You can feel it. The air has changed. It's thicker, heavier. Every breath tastes like copper and cold. The fire in the hearth is still burning, but the light it throws is weaker now, like the flames are struggling against something pressing down on them. The clock on the wall ticks. You check the time. 3 more hours until dawn. 3 more hours until your family comes home. 3 more hours of this. Outside, the candle flickers. You can see it through the window, a tiny, fragile flame dancing on the edge of extinction. The wax is melted down to almost nothing. There's maybe 5 minutes left. Maybe less. And when it goes out, you'll have to make a choice. Relight it, or don't. Both options are a trap. If you relight it, you have to open the door. You have to step outside, into the dark, where the thing has been waiting. Where it's been knocking. Where it's been wearing the faces of everyone you love, trying to trick you into letting it in. But if you don't relight it, the house goes dark. And a dark house on Christmas Eve is an open invitation. Not just to the thing outside, but to everything else that hunts in the spaces between light and shadow. The Nis. The Mylings. The forest spirits that only move when no one's watching. They're all waiting for the candle to die, waiting for you to fail. You stand up. Your legs are weak, shaking, but you force them to hold you. You walk to the window and press your forehead against the cold glass, staring at the flame. It's so small now, so fragile. You could let it die. You could sit here in the dark and wait for your family to come home. Maybe nothing would happen. Maybe the thing outside would just leave. Maybe the rules would protect you even without the light. But you don't believe that. Not anymore. Because the thing outside isn't just a creature. It's a test, a trial, a rite of passage encoded in tradition and fear. Your parents didn't leave you here to guard the house. They left you here to prove you could survive. And survival means keeping the flame alive. No matter what, you take a deep breath. The air tastes like ash and ice. You walk to the door. Your hand hovers over the latch. The metal is so cold it feels wet. You can hear your heartbeat in your ears, a frantic rhythm that drowns out everything else. Outside, the candle flickers. One more minute. You grip the latch, and you hear the voice again. But this time, it's not pretending to be someone else. It's just a voice. Flat, emotionless, old. If you open the door, I'll take you. You freeze. If you stay inside, I'll wait. The voice pauses, but the candle will die. You stare at the latch. Your hand is shaking so hard you can barely hold on. And when it dies, the others will come. The others, not just this thing. Others. They're not as patient as I am. You close your eyes. Your mind races. There has to be another way. There has to be a loophole, a trick, a solution your parents would have told you if they thought you'd need it. But they didn't tell you anything because they expected you to figure it out, or they expected you to fail. You open your eyes. The candle outside is dying, and you make a decision. You let go of the latch. You step back from the door. You walk to the fireplace, grab a piece of burning kindling, and carry it to the window. The heat sears your palm, but you don't let go. You press the burning wood against the inside of the glass, right where the frost is thickest. The ice melts. The glass heats, and for a moment, the light from the kindling shines through the window, casting a glow onto the doorstep, onto the candle. The flame outside flickers, then steadies, then grows. You don't know how. You don't know why. But the candle is burning brighter now, fed by the light from the fire inside, sustained by the same heat that's keeping you alive. You didn't break the rules. You didn't open the door. You didn't let anything in. But you kept the flame alive. And outside, in the darkness, the thing that was waiting makes a sound. Not a word, not a voice, a hiss. Long and low and furious. And then it's gone. The air in the house shifts. The weight lifts. The fire in the hearth roars back to life, casting warm light across the room. The shadows retreat to the corners where they belong. You drop the kindling and collapse onto the floor, gasping, shaking, alive. The candle outside burns steady, and you realize you passed the test. But the night isn't over yet. You lie there on the cold floor, your palm throbbing where the burning wood seared it. The pain is sharp and real and somehow comforting, because pain means you're still here, still alive, still yourself. The candle outside continues to burn, brighter than before, as if fed by your defiance. You watch it through the window, mesmerized by how it dances now, confident, strong, no longer struggling against the wind. The thing outside is gone. You can feel its absence the way you felt its presence. The air is lighter. The shadows are just shadows again. The house breathes normally, but you don't relax. Because you know, there are still 2 hours until dawn. 2 hours until your family returns. 2 hours for something else to test you. Because the voice said it. The others, they're not as patient as I am. You pull yourself up, using the wall for support, and return to your post by the window. Your legs are steadier now. Your hands have stopped shaking. Something has changed inside you. You're not the same child who sat here hours ago, terrified of every sound. You've learned something. The rules aren't just restrictions. They're tools, ways to survive, ways to fight back. You didn't have to open the door to save the candle. You found another way, and that matters. That changes everything. Morning comes slowly. Not because the sun rises slow, though it does, dragging itself over the horizon like it's exhausted, but because you spend the last 2 hours convinced morning will never come at all. You sit by the window, watching the candle. It burns steady now, bright and stubborn, like it's angry at how close it came to dying. You don't touch it. You don't go near the door. You just watch and wait. At some point, the cold stops bothering you. Not because it gets warmer, it doesn't, but because your body gives up on feeling it. You're numb, hollowed out. Every emotion you had has burned through you and left ash behind. You're not scared anymore. You're not relieved. You're just there. When the first light of dawn touches the horizon, you hear them. Footsteps in the snow. Voices. Your mother's laugh real this time, bright and human. Your father's low rumble. Your siblings arguing about something stupid. They're coming home. You stand. Your legs scream in protest, stiff from hours of sitting, but you force them to move. You walk to the door. Your hand grips the latch. This time, you don't hesitate. You open it. The cold rushes in, sharp and clean, scrubbing away the stale air that's been trapped inside all night. The candle on the doorstep is still burning. Your mother sees it first. She stops in the middle of the path, her hand going to her chest, and for a moment, her face does something complicated. Pride. Relief. Something else you can't name. You did it, she says. You nod. You don't tell her about the knocking, about the voices, about the thing wearing her face. You don't tell her how close the candle came to dying, or how you saved it, or how you spent the last hours convinced you wouldn't survive until morning. You just nod, because you did it. And that's all that matters. Your father claps you on the shoulder as he walks past. Your siblings barely glance at you. They're too busy complaining about the cold, about the walk, about how long the service was. No one asks how your night went. No one asks if you're okay, because they already know. They've all done it. Every child in the village has done it, and the ones who didn't, no one talks about them. Your mother picks up the candle from the doorstep. It's burned down to a nub, barely an inch of wax left. She holds it up to the light, studying it, then smiles. Good, she says. Then she blows it out. The flame dies. And with it, Christmas Eve ends. But the story doesn't. Because what happened to you, what happened to every child left alone on Christmas Eve in 1827, didn't stay in Sweden. It didn't stay in Scandinavia. It spread, not as fact, as myth. The tradition itself faded over the next few decades. Churches started holding earlier services. Communities built chapels closer to homes. Families stopped traveling miles through snow to attend midnight mass. And slowly, the practice of leaving children home alone on Christmas Eve disappeared. But the story remained. Because people love a good ghost story, especially one that's real, especially one that's theirs. By the 1840s, the tale of children guarding homes with candles on Christmas Eve had mutated. It wasn't about survival anymore. It wasn't about proving yourself. It was about terror, about isolation, about the things that come for you when you're alone. The story spread through trade routes, through immigrant communities, through sailors and merchants and travelers who carried it like cargo. Swedish immigrants brought it to America. German settlers carried it to the Midwest. Polish communities preserved it in their own folklore, and everywhere it went, it changed. In some versions, the child is protecting the house from spirits. In others, from demons. In still others, from something that doesn't have a name but everyone recognizes the thing that hunts children. The thing that wears familiar faces. The thing that knocks 3 times and waits for you to answer. By 1900, the story had become a staple of European ghost lore. Writers adapted it. Poets referenced it. Parents told it to their children as a cautionary tale. Stay inside. Keep the light burning. Don't answer the door. And somewhere along the way, the candle became more than a symbol. It became the rule. Because the rule was simple, universal, primal. Keep the light alive, and you're safe. Let it die, and you're not. But here's the thing about myths. They're not true, but they're not false either. They're something in between. A distillation of truth and fear and human experience, compressed into a story that feels real, because it is real not in the literal sense, but in the emotional one. You weren't guarding the house from demons on Christmas Eve, 1827. You were guarding it from the dark, from isolation, from fear, from the very human terror of being alone when you're too young to understand what alone means. The thing outside wasn't a monster. It was your mind, testing itself, seeing how much fear it could hold before it broke. The voices weren't ghosts. They were the wind, the settling of wood in the cold, the sound of your own breath echoing in the silence, shaped by your expectations into something that sounded like family. And the candle? The candle was just wax and fire, but it was also hope. And sometimes, hope is the only thing keeping the dark from swallowing you whole. The tradition ended, but the myth survived. And in 1990, a screenwriter named John Hughes wrote a movie about a boy left home alone at Christmas. The boy wasn't guarding the house from spirits or demons. He was guarding it from burglars. But the bones of the story, the structure, the fear, the isolation came from the same place. A child, a house, a night alone. And the question, will they survive until morning? The movie became a phenomenon, a cultural touchstone. Every year, millions of people watch it, and they laugh, and they feel nostalgic, and they think it's a story about family and resilience and clever traps. But underneath, let's talk about what fear actually does to a 9-year-old alone in a house. Not the Hollywood version, not the sanitized jump scare version, the real thing, the kind that crawls into your chest and makes a nest there. When you're a child, your brain isn't fully developed. The prefrontal cortex, the part that handles logic, reason, risk assessment, is still under construction. It won't finish building until you're 25. So when you're 9 years old and the shadows in your house start moving wrong, you can't talk yourself out of it. You can't say, that's just the wind, because your brain doesn't have the tools to fact-check your fear. All it has is pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is older than language, older than civilization, older than fire. It's the thing that kept your ancestors alive when a rustling in the bushes could be a rabbit or a predator. It's the thing that makes you freeze when you hear footsteps behind you in the dark. It's the thing that tells you, if it looks like danger, treat it like danger. Better to run from 100 shadows that aren't threats than ignore the one that is. So, when you're sitting alone in a house on Christmas Eve, 1827, and you hear knocking, your brain doesn't analyze it. It reacts. Heartbeat spikes. Adrenaline floods your system. Your pupils dilate. Your muscles tense. Your body is preparing you to fight or run, even though you're not allowed to do either, because the rules say stay inside. So you sit there, frozen, while your body screams at you to move. And that's where the real fear comes in. Not from the thing outside, from the conflict inside. Your body wants to run. Your mind tells you to stay. And the longer you sit there, paralyzed by the contradiction, the worse it gets. Because fear isn't static. It compounds. It builds on itself. Every second you don't act, the fear grows stronger, until it's not about the knocking anymore. It's about the fact that you can't move, can't act, can't do anything but sit there and wait for something to happen. That's the architecture of childhood fear. It's not about the monster under the bed. It's about being powerless to do anything about it. About being too small, too weak, too young to protect yourself. About being at the mercy of forces you don't understand and can't control. The Swedish families who left their children alone on Christmas Eve understood this. Maybe not consciously, maybe not in words, but they understood it in their bones. Because this wasn't just about tradition. It was about education. About teaching children that fear is survivable. That isolation is endurable. That when you're alone in the dark and something is testing you, you have more power than you think. The candle wasn't just a light source. It was a lesson. Keep this burning and you'll survive. Let it die and you won't. Simple, clear, a rule even a child could understand. But more than that, it was agency. It gave you something to do, something to focus on, something that made you feel like you had control, even when everything else was spiraling into chaos. Modern psychology calls this an external locus of control, giving people something tangible to manage when everything else feels unmanageable. The candle was your job, your responsibility, your mission. And as long as you had that mission, you weren't helpless. You were doing something, fighting back in the only way available to you. That's why the tradition worked. Not because it kept evil spirits away, but because it kept you sane. It gave structure to chaos, purpose to panic, a framework for surviving something that would otherwise be psychologically unbearable. Think about it. You're 9 years old. Your entire family has abandoned you. You're alone in a freezing house in the dead of winter, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but stories of monsters and ghosts filling your head. Without the candle, without the rules, without the framework of tradition to hold on to, you'd fall apart. You'd either run screaming into the night or you'd curl into a ball and wait to die. But with the candle, with the rules, you have a purpose, a reason to stay, a way to measure success. Keep the flame alive. Don't open the door. Don't answer when it knocks. Simple rules. Clear goals. Achievable victories. That's the architecture of survival. And your parents knew it? They didn't tell you this, of course. They couldn't, because explaining it would ruin it, would make it feel manufactured instead of sacred, would turn a rite of passage into a psychology experiment. So they just gave you the candle, told you the rules, and left, trusting that the framework would hold, that the tradition would do its work, that you'd figure out, through terror and triumph, what it meant to survive alone. And you did. Every child who stayed behind on Christmas Eve learned the same lesson. Not that monsters are real, but that you're stronger than you think. That fear is survivable. That isolation is temporary. That you can endure things you didn't think you could endure. That's the real myth. Not the story of the thing that knocks, but the story of the child who doesn't answer, who keeps the candle burning, who survives until morning. That's the story that spread across Europe, that traveled to America, that embedded itself in the cultural consciousness so deeply that 200 years later, we're still telling versions of it. Still watching movies about kids left home alone. Still feeling that primal thrill of a child surviving against the odds. Because the story isn't really about Christmas. It's about growing up. About the moment you realize your parents can't protect you from everything. About the night you spend alone, terrified, convinced you won't make it, and then morning comes and you're still there. Still alive. Still yourself. That's the architecture of fear. And it's also the architecture of courage. Because you can't have one without the other. You can't learn to be brave if you're never afraid. You can't discover your own strength if you're never tested. The Swedish families understood this. The tradition of the Christmas candle wasn't cruelty. It was initiation. A controlled dose of terror, administered in a framework of rules and tradition, designed to teach children that they could survive the dark. And it worked. For centuries, it worked. Until we decided it was too dangerous, too cruel, too traumatic. Until we started keeping our children close, protecting them from everything. never letting them face the dark alone. And maybe that's better. Maybe it's kinder. Maybe it's the right choice. But something was lost when the tradition ended. Something about resilience, about self-reliance, about the knowledge that you can survive alone if you have to, that you're not as fragile as you feel. That fear is temporary, but courage is something you build. The candle on the doorstep was never about keeping monsters away. It was about proving to yourself that you could keep the light alive, that when everything else was dark and cold and terrifying, you had the strength to tend a single flame. That's the myth. That's the lesson. That's what survived when the tradition died. And that's why, 200 years later, we're still telling this story, still watching it, still feeling it in our bones. Because deep down, we all remember what it felt like to be that child, alone in the dark, watching the candle burn, waiting for morning, hoping we'd survive. And when we did, when the sun finally rose and our parents came home and we realized we'd made it through the night, that feeling of triumph, of survival, of discovering we were stronger than we knew, that's not something you forget. That's not something that fades. That stays with you forever. That becomes part of who you are. That's the architecture of fear. And it's also the foundation of courage, built one terrifying night at a time, one flickering candle in the dark. One child, alone, learning what it means to survive. That's the real story. That's the one that matters. That's the myth that started it all. But let's talk about the others. The children who aren't in the story. The ones whose names you don't know. The ones who failed the test. Because for every child who kept the candle burning until dawn, there was another who didn't. Who broke the rules. Who opened the door. Who answered when something knocked. Who blew out the candle because they were tired or scared or just didn't believe anymore. What happened to them? The official answer is nothing. They survived. They grew up. They became farmers and blacksmiths and mothers and fathers. They lived normal lives. The tradition continued. The village moved on. But talk to the old people, the ones who remember, the ones who were there, and they'll tell you something different. They'll tell you about the boy in the next village over who opened the door on Christmas Eve, who came running out into the snow, screaming, pointing back at his house, who said there was something inside, something that looked like his mother but wasn't, something that smiled too wide. The adults went into the house. They found nothing, no footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing out of place. But the boy wouldn't go back inside. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. His parents had to abandon the house, build a new one, start over, and the boy? He stopped talking. For 6 months, he didn't say a word. When he finally spoke again, he was different, quieter, more careful. He never went anywhere alone, never stayed in a room by himself, never trusted shadows. Then there was the girl in the northern parish. She kept the candle burning, followed all the rules. But somewhere around midnight, she heard crying, a baby crying, just outside the door. She knew the rules. She knew not to answer. But it was a baby. How could she leave a baby outside in the cold? So she opened the door. Just a crack. Just a look. There was no baby. But something came inside anyway. They found her the next morning, sitting by the cold fireplace, staring at nothing. She was fine, physically. No injuries, no trauma. But she wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. Just sat there, staring, like she was watching something no one else could see. She died 3 weeks later. The doctor said it was fever, but everyone knew. Everyone understood. She'd let something in, and it had taken something from her, something vital, something that kept her tethered to the world of the living. These stories didn't spread the way the success stories did. They were whispered. kept quiet, shared only within families, only as warnings. Because admitting that children could fail, that the tradition could go wrong, that something terrible could actually happen, that undermined everything. That made it real. So the stories stayed small, local, hidden, but they were there. In every village, in every generation. The child who broke the rules and paid the price. Not always with death. Sometimes with something worse. With a life lived in fear. With a mind fractured by whatever they saw when they opened that door. With the knowledge that there are things in the dark that want you. That wait for you. That will take you if you give them permission. The Swedish government never acknowledged these stories. Neither did the church. Because officially, the tradition was harmless. A cultural practice. A way to teach responsibility and courage. Nothing more. But privately, there were debates. Clergy who argued the tradition was pagan, dangerous, inviting forces that shouldn't be invited. Local officials who documented cases of children showing signs of psychological trauma after Christmas Eve vigils. Families who quietly stopped participating, who made excuses, who kept their children with them at church, even if it meant social ostracism. By the mid-1800s, the tradition was dying not because of Enlightenment or progress, but because too many families had seen what it could do, had lost children, if not physically, then mentally, had watched their sons and daughters change after that night, become quieter, more fearful, less whole. The thing is, we'll never know how many children actually encountered something that night. How many heard the knocking and voices and saw the faces in the windows? How many were visited by whatever walks on Christmas Eve? Because the ones who survived and stayed sane, they didn't talk about it. They kept the secret. They'd passed the test, and part of passing the test was never speaking of what you endured. But the ones who broke, who couldn't keep silent, their stories were suppressed, dismissed as hysteria, as overactive imaginations, as the expected result of leaving a child alone in a dark house for hours. Nothing supernatural about it, just psychology, just fear, just children being children. Except the stories were too consistent, too specific, too similar across vast distances and isolated communities. The knocking always came in threes. The voices always sounded like family. The faces in the windows were always wrong in the same way. Too perfect, too symmetrical, too hungry. If these were just products of childhood imagination, why were they identical? Why did children who'd never met, who lived hundreds of miles apart, describe the same experiences? The same entity? The same test? The rational explanation is cultural contamination. Shared folklore. Stories spreading through trade routes and family connections. Children hearing the tales and then experiencing exactly what they'd been primed to expect. A self-fulfilling prophecy. The irrational explanation is that something was actually there. Something that walked on Christmas Eve. Something that tested children. Something that took the ones who failed. Which explanation is true? Does it matter? Because the effect was the same either way. Children were traumatized. Families were destroyed. The tradition, intended to build courage, sometimes built terror instead. And eventually, society decided the cost was too high. The churches moved their services earlier. The tradition ended. The candles stopped burning. But the children who survived those nights, they carried the memory forever. Carried the knowledge of what it felt like to be tested, to be alone, to face something in the dark and survive. Some of them became stronger for it, more resilient, more capable. They raised their children with a quiet confidence, a deep-seated knowledge that fear is survivable. Others never recovered. They lived small, careful lives, avoided darkness, kept lights burning in every room, refused to let their children out of sight. The tradition created two types of adults: those who learn courage and those who learn terror. And sometimes it created adults who learned both, who were brave and broken at the same time, who survived but never forgot, who kept candles burning on their doorsteps every Christmas Eve, not because tradition demanded it, but because they remembered, because they knew what walked in the dark, because they'd passed the test once and weren't sure they could do it again. Those are the ones who really understood, who knew the truth beneath the myth, that the candle wasn't protection. It was a marker, a signal, a way of saying, I'm here, I'm watching, I won't let you in. And most nights, that was enough. Most nights, the darkness respected the flame and moved on. But some nights it tested you anyway. And on those nights, everything depended on whether you were strong enough to keep the light burning, whether you could survive until dawn. Here's what science knows about darkness and the human brain. Scotopic vision, the way your eyes work in low light, is fundamentally different from photopic vision, which is how you see in daylight. When light levels drop, your pupils dilate. Your rod cells, which detect motion and shapes but not color, take over from your cone cells. Your visual acuity decreases by about 70%. You literally see less. But your brain doesn't like seeing less. It doesn't like gaps in information, so it fills them in. It takes the limited data your eyes provide, the vague shapes, the moving shadows, the peripheral flickers, and it completes the picture based on expectation, memory, and fear. This is called pareidolia, the tendency to see patterns, especially faces, in random or ambiguous stimuli. It's why you see faces in clouds, in wood grain, in the arrangement of objects on a shelf. It's a survival mechanism. Your ancestors, who were quick to spot a predator's face in the underbrush, survived. The ones who dismissed every shadow as nothing, they got eaten. So your brain errs on the side of caution. It assumes threat. It creates faces where there are none. And in darkness, when your visual information is limited and your fear is high, your brain goes into overdrive. Every shadow becomes a shape. Every shape becomes a figure. Every figure becomes something watching you. Add isolation to the mix, and it gets worse. Humans are social animals. We're hardwired for connection. Prolonged isolation triggers stress responses. Cortisol levels rise. The amygdala, your brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. Your hippocampus, which processes memory and context, starts struggling to distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. You become hypervigilant. Every sound, every movement, every change in your environment registers as potential danger. This is why solitary confinement is considered torture. Why isolation is one of the most effective ways to break someone psychologically. Because when you're alone long enough, especially in darkness, your brain starts turning on itself. Creating threats, inventing dangers, populating the emptiness with something, anything to explain the overwhelming sensation that you're not safe. Now, add childhood to this equation. A 9-year-old's brain doesn't have the executive function to override these responses. Doesn't have the cognitive tools to say, that's just pareidolia. That's just my amygdala overreacting. That's just normal stress response. A 9-year-old just experiences it, feels it, believes it. So when you're sitting in that house on Christmas Eve, 1827, and you see a shape in the corner, your brain created it. When you hear knocking and voices, that's the wind and the settling wood, filtered through expectation and fear, interpreted as threat. When you see a face in the window, that's your own reflection, distorted by frost and darkness, and your brain's desperate need to identify the source of your fear. Science can explain all of it. Every shadow, every sound, every terrifying moment. It's not supernatural. It's neurobiology. But here's the thing science can't explain. Why do the experiences match so precisely? Why do children separated by hundreds of miles, who've never communicated, who live decades apart, describe identical encounters? Same knocking pattern, same voice mimicry, same wrong faces. If it's all just psychology, why is the psychology so consistent? One answer: cultural priming. Children heard the stories, knew what to expect, and their brains obligingly produced the expected experience. Confirmation bias, self-fulfilling prophecy, the power of suggestion. Except the tradition predates the detailed stories. The first children left alone didn't have elaborate folklore to prime them. They didn't know what to expect. They just knew: stay inside, keep the candle burning, don't answer the door. And they came back with stories, specific stories, consistent stories. Stories that then became the folklore. So which came first? The experience or the expectation? Science doesn't have a good answer for that. It defaults to the rational explanation because that's what science does. But talk to neurologists who study collective hallucination, psychologists who research shared traumatic experiences, anthropologists who document cultural phenomena that shouldn't be possible but are. And they'll tell you, sometimes the data doesn't fit the model. Sometimes experiences are too consistent, too specific, too widespread to explain through conventional psychology. Sometimes you have to entertain the possibility that something else is happening. Not supernatural, necessarily, but something we don't understand yet. Some interaction between human consciousness and environment. Some way that fear and expectation and isolation can create experiences that feel real because, in some sense, they are real, not objectively, not physically, but psychologically, neurologically, experientially real. The candle burning on the doorstep? Science explains that easily. Fire produces light. Light reduces fear. Having a task, a focus, a sense of control reduces stress. The candle works because it gives you something to do, something to manage, something that makes you feel less helpless. But science struggles with this. Why did the candle have to stay lit? Why did letting it go out consistently result in worse outcomes? If it's just psychology, just the placebo effect of feeling protected, then the belief should be enough. But it wasn't. Children who kept the candle burning survived intact. Children who let it die, even if they stayed inside and followed the other rules, they came back changed every time. Across centuries, across countries, consistently. That's not psychology. That's pattern. And pattern suggests mechanism. Suggests something real, even if we don't understand what. Modern sleep science has discovered something interesting. The circadian rhythm, your body's internal clock, is regulated by light. But it's also affected by something else. The electromagnetic fields produced by living things. Your brain produces measurable electrical activity. So does your heart. So does every living cell in your body. And when you're alone, isolated, your electromagnetic signature is singular, distinct, easy to detect. But when you're part of a group, those signatures blend, overlap, create interference patterns that make individual detection harder. Fire produces electromagnetic fields too. Small ones, but measurable. And a burning candle creates a field pattern that, in theory, could mask or alter the electromagnetic signature of a lone child. Could make them less detectable to anything that hunts by sensing bioelectric fields. This is speculation. There's no peer-reviewed research confirming this. No studies testing whether candles actually provide electromagnetic camouflage. But the theory fits the pattern, fits the tradition, explains why the candle mattered so much. Why keeping it lit was the difference between safety and danger. Not because of light, not because of psychology, but because of physics we're only beginning to understand. The science of darkness isn't just about how we see in low light. It's about how darkness changes us, how isolation affects consciousness, how fear alters perception, how the absence of light creates space for something else, something we don't have names for yet, something that walked on Christmas Eve, testing children, taking the ones who failed. Was it real? Science says no. The data says maybe. The children who survived say yes. And maybe that's the only answer that matters. Because whether the thing in the dark was objectively real or just a creation of terrified minds, the effect was the same. Children were tested. Children were changed. Children learned that darkness is survivable, but only if you follow the rules. Only if you keep the light burning. Only if you refuse to answer when something knocks. That's not superstition. That's survival. And survival doesn't care whether the threat is real or imagined. It only cares that you made it to morning, that you kept the candle burning, that you passed the test. Science can explain the mechanisms, but it can't explain away the experience. Can't dismiss the pattern. Can't account for the consistency. So maybe the question isn't whether the thing in the dark was real. Maybe the question is, does it matter? Because real or not, children survived by believing it was. The tradition came to America in 1843. Swedish immigrants, fleeing poverty and famine, packed their belongings onto ships and crossed the Atlantic. They brought clothes, tools, seeds. They brought language, recipes, songs. And they brought the memory of Christmas Eve, of candles on doorsteps, of children left alone, of tests that determined who you'd become. The first Swedish settlement in Minnesota happened in the winter. Of course it did, because Swedish immigrants didn't understand American geography. Didn't realize that Minnesota winter was just as brutal as Sweden winter. Maybe worse. They built their homes, cleared their land, planted crops. And when Christmas came, they remembered. Some families tried to continue the tradition, tried to leave their children home while they traveled to the nearest church. But America was different. The distances were greater. The churches were farther. The communities were scattered. You couldn't walk 3 miles to church and be confident you'd make it back by dawn. You couldn't leave a 9-year-old alone for 8 hours in a frontier cabin and trust the neighbors would check in. There were no neighbors. There was just wilderness, just forest, just snow and cold and animals that actually would eat you if given the chance. So the tradition adapted. Families stayed home on Christmas Eve. They held their own services. They sang their own hymns. They created new traditions that fit their new world. But some families, the old ones, the traditional ones, the ones who remembered what the test meant, they found ways to continue it. Not the same way, but close enough. They'd send older children out to the barn on Christmas Eve to tend the animals, to make sure the livestock survived the night, to keep a lantern burning. It wasn't the same as staying in the house alone, but it was similar. Isolation, darkness, responsibility, a test. And the children who passed, who kept the lantern lit, who didn't panic when they heard sounds in the dark, they came back stronger, ready for the hardships of frontier life, ready to survive alone when survival meant the difference between building a new world and dying in it. The German immigrants brought their own version, Knecht Ruprecht, a figure who walked on Christmas Eve, testing children, punishing the ones who misbehaved. In Germany, Knecht Ruprecht was part of Christmas celebration. A folkloric figure, a story to keep children in line. But in America, isolated on farmsteads, far from community and support, Knecht Ruprecht became something else, became real in the same way the Swedish tradition was real. Because isolation changes folklore, turns stories into experiences, turns legends into tests. Polish immigrants had Dziadek, an ancestral spirit who visited on Christmas Eve, bringing blessings or curses depending on how he was received. In Poland, families prepared elaborate meals, set extra places at the table, welcomed the spirit. But in America, in the mining towns of Pennsylvania, in the factory cities of Illinois, the tradition changed, became darker, because the Polish immigrants weren't farming. They were working, dangerous work. Coal mines, steel mills, 12-hour shifts. Children left home alone weren't being tested for courage. They were being tested for survival. And Dziadek, the benevolent ancestor spirit, became something else. Became the thing that checked on you. Made sure you were following the rules. Made sure you could survive. And if you couldn't, if you failed the test, you didn't get blessings. You got taken. The tradition mutated as it spread. Each immigrant group brought their own version. Each version adapted to American geography, American industry, American isolation. But the core remained the same. A child, alone, darkness, a test, and something watching, making sure you were strong enough, making sure you could survive. The American frontier demanded it, demanded children who could handle isolation, who could face danger without panicking, who could keep the light burning when everything else was dark, because America was wilderness, was vast, was unforgiving, and the families who survived were the ones whose children passed the test, who learned early that fear is survivable, that darkness is temporary. That morning always comes if you can just hold on. By the late 1800s, the tradition had spread beyond immigrant communities. Native-born Americans heard the stories, adapted them, created their own versions. The idea of leaving children home on Christmas Eve became a rural American tradition. Not universal, not official, but common enough that everyone knew someone who'd done it, who'd passed the test, who'd survived the night. And the children who went through it, they became the backbone of American expansion. The farmers who settled the plains, the miners who went into mountains, the loggers who cleared forests, the people who could handle isolation, hardship, danger, because they'd been tested early, been taught that survival means following rules, keeping light burning, refusing to answer when something dangerous calls. That's the immigrant experience in miniature, coming to a new world, being tested, learning to survive or failing and disappearing. The tradition wasn't just about Christmas. It was about America itself, about what it took to survive here, about what it cost, and about what you became if you made it through. The candle on the doorstep wasn't just a Swedish tradition anymore. It was an American one, a symbol of frontier resilience, of immigrant determination, of the price you paid to belong. And when the tradition finally died, when families stopped leaving children alone, when society decided it was too dangerous, too cruel, too traumatic, something was lost. Not just a tradition, but a way of creating adults who could handle the hardness of life, who'd been tested and survived, who knew deep in their bones that they were stronger than they looked. The modern world doesn't test children that way anymore. We protect them, keep them safe, shield them from darkness and isolation and fear. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's progress. But sometimes, when you meet someone whose grandparents were immigrants, whose family has that old world hardness, that quiet resilience, you can tell. You can see it in their eyes. The knowledge that they come from people who were tested, who passed, who survived, who kept the candle burning when everything else wanted it to die. Fast forward to 1990. John Hughes is writing a screenplay. He's thinking about Christmas movies, about family, about the feeling of being left behind. He's not thinking about Swedish folklore. Doesn't know about the candle tradition. Has never heard of children being tested on Christmas Eve in 1827. But he's tapping into something. Some collective memory. Some primal fear that lives in the cultural consciousness, whether we know its origin or not. The movie is called Home Alone. The premise is simple. A boy is accidentally left behind when his family goes on vacation. He has to defend his house from burglars. It's a comedy. It's light, it's fun. Kids set traps. Bad guys get hurt in cartoonish ways. Families reconcile. Everyone learns lessons about appreciating each other. It's wholesome. It's heartwarming. It becomes one of the biggest movies of all time. But underneath the comedy, underneath the slapstick and the sentiment, the bones of the story are ancient. A child, alone in a house. Darkness falling. Strangers at the door. The need to survive until morning. Until the family returns. The traps Kevin sets aren't just clever. They're rituals. They're rules. They're the same kind of framework that the candle provided. Do this, and you'll be safe. Follow these steps, and you'll survive. The burglars aren't supernatural, but they serve the same function as the thing that knocked on Christmas Eve. They're the test, the threat, the thing that tries to get in. And Kevin's job isn't just to stop them. It's to prove he can survive alone, that he's strong enough, brave enough, capable enough, that he doesn't need his parents to protect him. That's the real story. Not home invasion comedy, but coming of age. The moment a child realizes they're not helpless, that they have agency, that they can fight back, that they can survive. And millions of people watched it, loved it, made it a cultural touchstone, because the story resonated. Not because it was new, but because it was old, ancient, primal. The same story we've been telling for thousands of years. About children facing darkness. About tests that determine who you become. About surviving until morning. John Hughes didn't know he was adapting Swedish folklore, but he was. Because the story is bigger than any one tradition. It's human, universal. Every culture has a version. Every generation rediscovers it. Because every child, at some point, has to face the dark alone. Has to survive something that feels insurmountable. Has to prove they're strong enough to keep going. Home Alone was just a 1990 version. The sanitized, commercial, Hollywood version. But it worked because the bones were true. Because the fear was real. Because every kid who watched it recognized the terror of being left behind. Of being alone. Of having to defend yourself when no one else is there to help. And every parent who watched it remembered what it felt like to be that child. To be tested. To survive. To discover you were stronger than you knew. The movie spawned sequels. Imitators. An entire genre of kids defending themselves stories. Because the formula works. Because the myth is powerful. Because we need stories about children surviving alone. About fear being temporary. About morning always coming. But here's what the movie got wrong. It made it seem like the test was external. Like the burglars were the real threat. Like Kevin's cleverness and traps were what saved him. But that's not how the original tradition worked. The test wasn't about defeating an external enemy. It was about managing internal fear. About keeping the candle burning when your own mind was trying to blow it out. About refusing to answer when your own loneliness made you desperate for company. About surviving yourself. That's the harder story. The one Hollywood can't really tell. Because it's not visual. It's not exciting. It's just a child, sitting alone, fighting to stay calm while everything in their brain is screaming at them to panic. That's the real test. And that's what modern children don't get anymore. We've eliminated the darkness, filled every moment with light, with distraction, with connection. Kids are never alone. never truly isolated, never forced to sit with fear and figure out how to survive it. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's progress. But something's missing. Some knowledge that previous generations had. Some understanding of their own resilience. Some confidence that came from being tested and passing. Modern kids grow up anxious, uncertain, constantly seeking validation, reassurance, protection, because they've never had to survive alone. Never had to face fear and come out the other side. Never had to keep a candle burning when everything was dark. Is that our fault? Is it society's fault? Is it just the natural evolution of civilization that we protect our children more, shelter them better, keep them safer? Maybe, probably. But the cost is real. You can see it in rising anxiety rates, in the epidemic of young adults who can't handle stress, who fall apart at the first sign of difficulty, who never learn that fear is temporary. That darkness ends. That morning always comes if you can just hold on. The candle tradition was cruel, was traumatic, was dangerous, but it taught something we've forgotten how to teach. That you're stronger than you think. That you can survive alone. That fear is manageable if you have rules, structure, something to focus on. Home Alone tried to teach that lesson through comedy, through wish fulfillment, through the fantasy that a clever kid can defeat adult threats with cartoon violence. But it's not the same. It's not real. It doesn't stick. Because the lesson isn't about defeating enemies. It's about surviving yourself. And that's a lesson you can't learn from a movie. You have to live it. Have to sit in the dark, alone, terrified, and refuse to give up. Have to keep the candle burning when everything in you wants to let it die. That's the myth. That's the tradition. That's what we lost when we decided children shouldn't be tested anymore. And maybe we're better off. Maybe kindness is more important than resilience. Maybe protection is more valuable than strength. Maybe we've evolved past the need for such harsh lessons. Or maybe we've just forgotten that darkness is survivable. That children are stronger than we give them credit for. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let them face fear and discover they can overcome it. The candle is still burning. Somewhere. In the cultural memory. In the stories we tell. In the movies we watch. In the primal fear that every child feels when they're alone in the dark. We just don't call it a candle anymore. We call it a night light, a phone screen, a TV left on for comfort. But it's the same thing, the same need, the same ancient understanding that light keeps you safe. That as long as you have something to focus on, something to tend, something to keep alive, you can survive. 3 knocks. Always 3. Never 2. Never 4. Always 3 deliberate strikes against wood. Knock. Knock. Why 3? Psychology offers answers. 3 is the minimum number needed to establish pattern. 1 knock could be accident. 2 could be coincidence. But 3? 3 is intention. 3 is communication. 3 is something trying to get your attention. Anthropologists note that 3 appears across cultures as a magic number. 3 wishes, 3 trials, 3 attempts, the Holy Trinity, past, present, future, beginning, middle, end. 3 is completion, is wholeness, is the number that signals something significant is happening. So when something knocks 3 times on Christmas Eve, your brain recognizes it immediately, not as random sound, as message, as warning, as test. The thing outside knows this. Whether it's supernatural entity or psychological manifestation doesn't matter. It knows that 3 knocks will get response, will trigger recognition, will make you pay attention, because 3 knocks means, I'm here, I know you're there, and I'm not leaving. Modern psychology calls this the rule of 3. The principle that things grouped in threes are more satisfying, more effective, more memorable than other numbers. Comedians know this. Setup, callback, punchline. Writers know this. 3-act structure. 3 main characters. 3 chances to succeed. Advertisers know this. 3 benefits. 3 features. 3 reasons to buy. And whatever walks on Christmas Eve knows it too. Knows that knocking 3 times creates maximum psychological impact. Creates the pattern recognition that makes you believe something intelligent is out there. Something that understands communication. Something that wants in. But here's the deeper question. Why does the knocking stop after you don't answer? If it's really trying to get in, why doesn't it keep knocking? Why doesn't it break the door down? Why does it accept your refusal? Because the test isn't about force. It's about permission. Whatever it is, it can't enter unless invited. Can't cross the threshold unless you open the door. This is consistent across folklore. Vampires must be invited in. Demons need permission. Fairies require consent. The rules are old, ancient, embedded in stories across every culture. You have dominion over your own space. Nothing can violate that without your cooperation. So the knocking isn't an attempt to break in. It's an attempt to trick you into opening, into granting access, into giving permission. That's why it uses familiar voices. Why it sounds like your mother, your father, yourself. Because familiar voices make you want to open the door, make you doubt the rules, make you think, surely it's safe to open for family. But it's not family. It's never family. It's something wearing family like a costume. Using the voices you trust to bypass your defenses, to make you forget the rules, to convince you that this time, just this once, it's okay to open the door. Child psychologists who study fear responses note something interesting. Children are actually better at following arbitrary rules than adults. Tell a child, don't open the door no matter what, and they'll obey, even when it seems illogical. Tell an adult the same thing, and they'll start reasoning. Start finding exceptions. Start convincing themselves the rule doesn't apply in this specific circumstance. Children haven't developed that rationalization capacity yet. They just follow rules. Which is why the tradition worked, why children survived. They didn't question, didn't rationalize, didn't convince themselves it was probably fine to open the door just a crack. They just obeyed, and obedience saved them. The knock is a psychological weapon, precisely calibrated to exploit human social instincts. We're programmed to respond to knocking, to recognize it as a request for entry, to feel obligated to answer. Ignoring a knock feels wrong, feels rude, feels like violating social contract. So, when you're sitting alone on Christmas Eve and you hear that knock, every social instinct you have is screaming at you to answer, to open the door, to see who's there. But the rules say don't. Say ignore your instincts. Say trust the tradition more than your own impulses. That's the real test. Not whether you're brave enough to face what's outside, but whether you're disciplined enough to resist your own nature, to follow rules that feel wrong, to trust structure over instinct. Most children failed this test not because they were weak, but because they were human. Because the knocking triggered responses they couldn't control. Because the voices exploited bonds they couldn't break. Because every fiber of their being said, "That's your mother. Open the door." And they did. And they learned too late that following instinct instead of rules has consequences. The survivors weren't necessarily braver. They were more obedient. More willing to trust tradition over feeling. More able to sit with discomfort, with uncertainty, with the terrible wrongness of ignoring someone who might need help. That's not a skill we value anymore. Modern child rearing emphasizes following your feelings, trusting your instincts, listening to your heart. All good advice for normal situations. Terrible advice when something is testing you. When something is using your own humanity against you. The knock is still happening. Not literally. Not on Christmas Eve, but metaphorically. Every day. Every time someone tries to manipulate you by exploiting your empathy, your social obligation, your desire to help. The scammer who calls pretending to be your grandchild in trouble. The email that looks exactly like your bank asking for information. The person who uses your kindness to gain access they shouldn't have. Same technique. Same exploitation of human instinct. Same test. Will you follow the rules, or will you let your emotions override your judgment? Most people fail, because we're not trained anymore to resist that knock. Not taught to follow rules that feel wrong. Not practiced in sitting with discomfort while something we trust seems to need us. We've lost that skill, that discipline, that knowledge that sometimes the kindest voice is the most dangerous one, and we've paid for it in scams, in manipulation, in people who exploit our better nature for their own gain. The tradition of the Christmas knock taught children something crucial. Not everyone who sounds trustworthy is. Not every request for help is genuine. Not every familiar voice belongs to family. Sometimes the rules matter more than feelings. Sometimes obedience is survival. Sometimes you have to ignore every instinct and just follow the structure. That's a hard lesson. An uncomfortable lesson. A lesson that feels wrong to teach. Because it seems to contradict everything else we tell children about empathy and helping and being good people. But it's not contradictory, it's complementary. Be kind, be helpful, be empathetic, but also be smart. Follow rules. Recognize manipulation. Don't open the door just because something knocks. Know the difference between genuine need and exploitation, between real family and something wearing family's voice. That's what the knock taught. That's what we lost. And that's why, 200 years later, people still feel something when they hear 3 knocks on a door. Still feel that primal recognition, that ancient warning, that knowledge buried deep in cultural memory, that 3 knocks means something is testing you, something wants in. And whether you survive depends on whether you can resist the urge to answer. The knock is patient, always has been. It doesn't break down doors, doesn't force entry, just waits. Waits for you to forget the rules. To rationalize, to convince yourself it's probably fine. And the moment you open that door, the moment you give permission, it doesn't need to force anything anymore. You invited it in. And that makes all the difference. The candle was never just a candle. It was a metaphor for hope, for vigilance, for the small, fragile thing you have to protect when everything else is trying to extinguish it. Think about what a candle actually is. Wax and wick, fuel and fire. The wax melts, feeding the flame. The flame consumes the wax, destroying the very thing that sustains it. It's a process of self-destruction that produces light. The candle dies so you can see. That's the metaphor. You have to consume yourself to survive. Have to burn your own resources, your own energy, your own reserves to make it through the dark. The candle doesn't last forever. Can't last forever. It has limits, boundaries, a finite amount of fuel. And when it runs out, the light dies. Unless you replace it. Unless you find more fuel. Unless you keep feeding the flame. That's the lesson. Survival isn't about having unlimited resources. It's about managing limited ones. About rationing. About making what you have last until morning. About understanding that the flame is temporary but necessary. You can't save the candle by refusing to light it. Can't preserve the wax by keeping it dark. The only way forward is to burn, to consume, to accept that maintaining light requires sacrifice. The Swedish families understood this. They gave their children one candle, not two, not a box of matches for relighting. One candle, one chance, finite resources. And the message was clear. Make it last. Be careful. Be vigilant. Because if you waste it, if you let it burn too fast, if you're careless with what you have, you'll be in darkness. And darkness is death. This is the opposite of modern parenting. We give our children abundance. Backup plans, safety nets, multiple chances, unlimited resources, and we think we're being kind, being responsible, being good parents. But we're teaching the wrong lesson. We're teaching that resources are infinite, that there's always more, that you don't have to be careful because someone will always replace what you waste. And then our children grow up and discover that's not true, that resources are finite, that waste has consequences, that no one's coming to replace the candle if you let it die, and they're not prepared, haven't been trained, don't have the muscle memory of rationing, of vigilance, of careful management of limited resources. So they burn through everything: money, energy, opportunities, relationships. They consume without thought because they've never had to make something last, never had to sit in the dark watching a flame get smaller, knowing that when it dies, there's nothing left. The candle teaches conservation, teaches respect for resources, teaches that light isn't free, isn't infinite, isn't guaranteed. Someone had to make that candle, had to render the fat or harvest the wax, had to twist the wick, had to shape and pour and create this small temporary source of light. And now it's yours, your responsibility, your job to make it last. That's wealth in miniature. That's economics in its purest form. You have XX is all you have. Make it last until dawn. If you succeed, you survive. If you fail, you don't. No loans, no bailouts, no second chances. Just you and the candle and the dark. Modern society has lost this understanding. We've created systems where waste doesn't immediately result in darkness, where you can burn through resources and still have light because someone else is paying for it. Governments, credit cards, social safety nets, all good things, all necessary things. But they've disconnected cause from effect, made it possible to be wasteful without immediate consequences. And we've forgotten the fundamental truth the candle taught. Everything runs out eventually. Every resource has limits. Every flame dies. The only question is whether you managed it well enough to survive until morning, or whether you let it die in the middle of the night. The candle is also a metaphor for attention, for focus, for the small, bright thing you have to protect from the wind of distraction. In that house on Christmas Eve, the candle was your job, your mission, the thing you had to watch, to tend, to protect. Everything else was secondary. The cold? Deal with it. The fear? Manage it. The sounds in the dark? Ignore them. Your job was the candle. Keep it burning. Nothing else mattered. That's focus. That's priority. That's the ability to identify what's essential and protect it at all costs. Modern life is the opposite. We're told everything is essential. Every email is urgent. Every notification is important. Every demand on our attention deserves immediate response. So we fragment, divide our focus, try to tend 1,000 small flames instead of one essential one. And we wonder why we're exhausted, why nothing seems to work, why we can't maintain anything. Because you can't protect 1,000 flames, can't give them all the attention they need, can't prevent them all from dying, but you can protect one, can give it your full attention, can keep it alive through the night. That's what the candle taught. Not that you have to do everything, but that you can protect one, can give it your full attention, can keep it alive through the night. That's what the candle taught. Not that you have to do everything, but that you can protect one, can give it your full attention, can keep it alive through the night. That's what the candle taught. that you have to choose the one thing that matters and protect it. Let everything else fall away. Let the cold be cold. Let the fear be fear. Let the sounds be sounds. Your job is the candle. And if you can keep that alive, everything else will take care of itself. Come morning, your family returns. The cold doesn't matter anymore. The fear fades. The sounds stop. Because you survived. Because you kept the essential thing alive. That's the metaphor. That's the lesson. That's what we've forgotten in our world of infinite demands and scattered attention. We've forgotten how to identify the candle, how to protect it, how to say, this matters, everything else is secondary. So we try to do everything, and we fail at all of it. The candle also represents something else, something harder to name. The part of you that wants to keep living, the will to survive. The tiny flame of hope that keeps burning even when everything is dark and cold and terrible. That flame can be extinguished by depression, by trauma, by accumulated losses that make you think, what's the point? Why keep trying? Why keep burning myself to produce light when the darkness is everywhere? The answer the candle gives is simple. Because morning comes. Because the darkness is temporary. Because if you can just keep that flame alive a little longer, just make it through this night, the sun will rise. And when it does, everything changes. That's not toxic positivity, not empty reassurance. It's the fundamental truth of human existence. Everything passes. Every night ends. Every winter becomes spring. If you can just hold on, just keep the flame alive, just refuse to give up, you'll survive. And survival is victory. The families who practiced this tradition understood. They weren't being cruel. They were teaching the most important lesson anyone can learn. You are stronger than you think. You can survive more than you believe. You can keep going when everything in you wants to stop. You just have to protect the flame. Just have to make it through the night. Just have to hold on until morning. And morning always comes. Always. The candle proves it. Every night. Every flame. Every child sitting alone in the dark, watching the wax melt, counting the hours, wondering if they'll make it. They do. They always do. As long as they keep the candle burning. As long as they protect that small, essential flame. As long as they refuse to give up. That's the metaphor. That's the tradition. That's the truth the candle carries. You have everything you need to survive. You just have to protect it. To tend it. To refuse to let it die. Do that, and you'll see morning. Do that, and you'll discover you're stronger than you ever imagined. Do that, and you'll understand what your ancestors knew. The candle isn't just light. It's proof. Proof that you can survive the dark. Proof that morning comes. Proof that hope, carefully tended, is enough to carry you through. That's why the tradition mattered. Why the candle mattered. Why, 200 years later, we still tell stories about children sitting alone in the dark, protecting a flame, surviving until dawn. Because that's not just a story. That's life. That's the human experience. That's what we all have to do every day in 1,000 small ways. Protect the flame. Make it through the night. Hold on until morning. The candle teaches us how. Shows us it's possible. Proves that even the smallest light, carefully protected, is enough to survive the darkest night. That's the metaphor. That's the truth. That's why the candle still burns. In our stories. In our memories. In the cultural consciousness that remembers what it takes to survive. Keep the flame alive. That's all. That's everything. Dawn comes like forgiveness. Slowly. Gradually. A softening of darkness that you don't notice until suddenly you can see the outline of trees. The shape of the road. The world returning from nothing. You're still sitting by the window. You haven't moved in hours. Your body is numb. Your mind is quiet. Not peaceful, just empty, hollowed out by hours of vigilance. Hours of fear. Hours of sitting in darkness, protecting a flame, refusing to break. The candle outside is still burning. Barely. The wick is drowning in melted wax. The flame is the size of a pinprick, but it's there, still alive, still burning. You kept it alive. You made it through. You survived. The first birdsong starts somewhere in the forest, a single note, then another, then a chorus, the world waking up, the night releasing its hold, magic hour. The photographers call it that. The time between darkness and light when everything is soft, possible, new. You hear them before you see them. Voices on the road, your mother's laugh, your father saying something about the cold, your siblings complaining, normal sounds, human sounds, family sounds. The door opens, cold air rushes in. Your mother sees you first. She stops, her hand goes to her mouth, and you realize you must look terrible, wild, changed, like you've been somewhere she can't follow. She crosses the room quickly, kneels in front of you. Her hands cup your face. They're warm, so warm. You didn't realize how cold you were until now. Are you all right? She asks. You nod. You can't speak yet. Can't find words for what you've experienced. Can't explain that you're not the same child she left here. That something changed during the night. That you understand things now you didn't before. She pulls you close. You smell cinnamon and cold wool and the specific scent that is just her. Just mother. Just safety. You start crying. Not because you're sad. Not because you're scared. Because it's over. Because you made it. Because morning came just like they said it would. Your father puts his hand on your head. Doesn't say anything. Doesn't need to. The weight of his hand is approval. Is acknowledgement. Is welcome to the group of people who survived. Your siblings are already inside, warming themselves by the fire, talking about the service, about who was there, about the food at the reception after. They glance at you. Something passes between you. Recognition. They've been where you are. They know, but they don't talk about it. No one talks about it. That's part of the tradition, too. What happens on Christmas Eve stays in the dark. Stays in the space between who you were and who you've become. Your mother goes to the doorstep. Picks up the candle. The flame dies as she lifts it. Its job is done. She looks at the melted wax, at the tiny stub of wick, at how close it came to dying before dawn. She doesn't say anything, just carries it inside, places it on the mantle, a marker, a memory, a reminder of what you did. Your family settles into morning routine. Breakfast, chores, the normal rhythm of Christmas Day. But you're not part of it yet. You're still half in the night, still processing, still integrating what happened. Your mother notices, brings you bread and milk, sits with you while you eat, still doesn't ask questions, just sits, just is present, just holds space for whatever you need. Eventually, the words come, not about the knocking, not about the voices, not about the thing that wore her face, just, I kept the candle burning. She nods. I know, it almost died, but it didn't. I didn't know what to do, but you figured it out. I was so scared. But you stayed, that's all. That's the whole conversation. But it's enough, because she understands. She's been there. Every adult in the village has been there. They know what the night contains, what it demands, what it costs. And they know what you gained, what you learned, what you became. Later, when the family is occupied with Christmas celebrations, your father takes you outside. You walk to the edge of the property, to where the forest begins. He doesn't say much. Your father never says much, but he points to the trees, to the darkness that still lives there, even in daylight. It's always there, he says. The dark. You nod. You know this now. Knew it before, but differently. Abstractly. Now you know it in your bones. But it can't touch you, he continues. Not if you follow the rules. What if I broke the rules? You ask. He looks at you. Really looks at you. Did you? No. He nods. Then you passed. That's all. That's the whole acknowledgement. No ceremony. No celebration. No public recognition. Just, you passed. You're one of us now. You understand. Welcome. Over the following days, you notice changes. Small ones. The way adults include you in conversations they wouldn't have before. The way your older siblings treat you less like an annoyance, more like an equal. The way you feel about yourself. Stronger. Steadier. Like you've proven something. Not to them. To yourself. You can survive alone. You can face fear. You can make it through the dark. That knowledge changes everything. Changes how you approach challenges. How you handle fear. How you think about yourself. You're not helpless. Not fragile. Not dependent. You can survive. That's what the night taught you. That's what the candle proved. That's what the tradition was designed to create. Adults who'd been tested, who'd passed, who knew they could survive. The tradition continued for you. When you were old enough, when you had children, you continue it, pass it down, give them the same test, the same night, the same chance to discover their own strength. Or you wouldn't. Maybe you decide it was too cruel, too dangerous, too traumatic. Maybe you protect your children from the dark instead of teaching them to survive it. That choice was yours. That's what passing the test earned you, the right to decide. But you'd never forget, never lose the memory of that night. Of sitting alone, watching a candle burn, hearing something knock, refusing to answer. Of making it to morning. Of discovering you were stronger than you knew. That memory would carry you through everything that came after. Every hardship. Every loss. Every moment when life demanded more than you thought you could give. You'd remember, I survived that night. I kept the candle burning. I can survive this too, and you would. Because the test wasn't just about Christmas Eve. It was about life. About having the strength to face darkness. The discipline to follow rules when instinct says break them. The courage to tend a small flame when everything is trying to extinguish it. Those skills, those lessons, they didn't expire at dawn. They were yours forever. Built into you. Part of who you'd become. That's the return. Not just your family coming home, but you coming home to yourself. To a stronger, steadier, more capable version of yourself. A version that knows what it can survive. That's been tested and passed. That's proven. The night changed you. Made you different. Better. The candle burned itself away, giving light. You burned yourself away, becoming strong. Both transformations were necessary. Both were the point. You're not the child your parents left. You're the adult they were creating. And when the sun rises on Christmas morning, you understand. This wasn't abandonment. It was gift. Cruel, harsh, terrifying, but gift nonetheless. The gift of knowing you can survive. That morning always comes. That you're stronger than you think. That's what the tradition gave. That's what the candle proved. That's what you carry forward. Forever. And when people ask you, years later, about Christmas traditions in your family, you'll smile. You'll say something vague about candles and church and old customs. You won't tell them the truth. Won't explain the test. Won't describe the night, because some things are earned, not told. 200 years later, the candles are gone. The tradition is dead. No one leaves children alone on Christmas Eve anymore. We've evolved past that, become more civilized, more protective, more aware of childhood trauma and psychological damage, and all the ways adults can harm children by demanding too much too soon. We're better now, right? But sometimes, late at night, when parents put their children to bed, they leave a nightlight on. A small flame. Electric now. Safe. Contained. But still. Still light in darkness. Still a marker. Still a way of saying, you're protected. You're safe. Nothing can touch you while the light burns, and the children sleep peacefully, never knowing why the light matters, never understanding the ancient instinct their parents are following, never learning what their ancestors knew. That light is protection. That darkness is test. That survival means vigilance. Is that better? Is our way kinder? Are we right to protect instead of test? Maybe. Probably. Children shouldn't have to face terror to prove themselves. Shouldn't have to survive alone to earn adulthood. Shouldn't have to keep candles burning to demonstrate worth. That's not love. That's not kindness. That's trauma masquerading as tradition. But something's missing. You can see it in how children grow now. How they reach adulthood without ever being truly tested. How they face normal life challenges and crumble. How anxiety and depression rates climb every year. How young people report feeling helpless, hopeless, incapable. How therapy offices fill with adults who never learned they could survive hard things. Because they never had to survive hard things. We protected them from everything. Gave them safety, comfort, support. Everything except the knowledge that they were strong. That they could handle difficulty. That they could survive. And now they don't believe they can. Because belief requires evidence. And we never gave them evidence. Never gave them a night alone. Never gave them a candle to protect. Never gave them the chance to discover their own strength. We were being kind. We were being careful. We were being good parents. But we forgot something the Swedish families knew. That kindness without testing creates fragility. That protection without challenge creates weakness. The children who are never allowed to face fear never learn to overcome it. The tradition was cruel, but it worked. Created generations of adults who could handle hardship, who could survive isolation, who could face fear and continue functioning, who knew, deep in their bones, that they were capable. We don't create those adults anymore. We create people who need constant reassurance, constant validation, constant protection from anything uncomfortable. And we wonder why they struggle, why they can't handle normal life stress, why they need so much support just to function. Because we never taught them the lesson the candle taught, that you can survive hard things, that fear is temporary, that morning always comes, that you're stronger than you think. How do we teach that now? How do we give our children evidence of their own strength without traumatizing them? Without leaving them alone in dark houses? Without demanding they face things they're not ready for? That's the question modern parenting struggles with. We want our children to be resilient, but we don't want them to suffer. We want them to be strong, but we don't want to test them. We want them to be capable, but we don't want to demand capability. So we hover, we protect, we smooth every path, remove every obstacle, solve every problem. And we create children who never learn to do any of that for themselves, who reach adulthood believing they're incapable, fragile, dependent, because that's what we taught them. Not with words, with actions, by never letting them prove themselves. The candle tradition is dead, but the need isn't. Children still need to be tested, need to face challenges, need opportunities to discover their own strength. We just need to find ways to provide that without causing trauma, without leaving them alone in literal darkness, without demanding they survive terror to prove worth. Sports used to do this, gave children physical challenges. opportunities to fail, to push through, to discover capability. But we've made sports safer, less demanding, more about participation than achievement, more about feeling good than getting better. School used to do this. Gave children intellectual challenges, difficult problems to solve, standards to meet, consequences for failure. But we've made school easier, more supportive, more about self-esteem than mastery, more about feeling capable than becoming capable. Work used to do this. Gave young people early responsibility, real stakes, consequences, opportunities to fail and learn and try again. But we've delayed adulthood, extended childhood into the 20s, protected young people from real stakes until they're so old they've never learned how to handle them. So where do children learn they're strong? Where do they face real tests? Where do they get evidence of their own capability? Nowhere. They don't. They reach adulthood untested, and then life tests them. And they're not ready. The candle tradition was one answer. Harsh, cruel, traumatic, but effective. It gave children evidence, gave them a test they could pass, gave them proof they were strong. We need new answers, better answers, kinder answers, but we still need answers. Because the fundamental question hasn't changed. How do we create adults who know they can survive? Who've been tested and passed? Who've faced fear and overcome it? Who've kept the flame burning through the dark? That's not optional. That's essential. That's what creates functional adults. Capable humans. People who can handle life's inevitable hardships without falling apart. The tradition is dead, but the need is alive. More urgent than ever. Because we're creating generations of people who don't believe in their own strength. Who've never been tested. Who've never survived anything difficult. Who don't know what they're capable of. And that's dangerous. Not because it makes them weak, but because it makes them believe they're weak. When they're not. When they're capable of so much more than they know. When they're strong enough to survive. They just haven't been given the chance to prove it. So maybe the lesson isn't about bringing back the tradition. Maybe it's about understanding what the tradition taught. That children need challenges. Need opportunities to be tested. Need chances to fail and try again and eventually succeed. Need evidence of their own capability. Need to learn, early and often, that they're stronger than they think. That's not cruelty. That's preparation. That's love in its truest form. Giving children not comfort, but confidence. Not protection, but proof. Not safety, but strength. The candle is gone, but the lesson remains. Keep the light burning. Face the darkness. Survive until morning. And when you do, when you make it through, you'll know something essential about yourself. You'll know you can survive. You'll know you're strong. You'll know that fear is temporary, and morning always comes, and you have everything you need to make it through. That knowledge is the inheritance the tradition left. Not trauma, not terror, but proof, evidence, certainty. The certainty that you can survive. That's what modern children need. What modern adults need. What we've all forgotten in our quest to make life easier, safer, more comfortable. Life isn't easy, isn't safe, isn't comfortable. Life is hard. And the only way to survive hard things is to know you can. To have evidence. To have been tested and passed. The tradition gave that. Gave children one night, one test, one candle, and said, survive this, and you'll know you can survive anything. We don't have to bring back the tradition. Don't have to leave children alone in dark houses. Don't have to demand they face terror. But we do have to find new ways to give them that test, that challenge, that opportunity to discover they're strong. Because without it, we're raising people who don't believe in themselves, who can't handle difficulty, who fall apart at the first sign of hardship, who need constant support, constant reassurance, constant protection. And that's not kindness. That's not love. That's setting them up to fail. The candle taught survival, taught vigilance, taught strength. We need new candles, new traditions, new ways to teach those same lessons without the trauma. New ways to give children evidence of their own capability. New ways to create adults who know they can survive. Because the world still has darkness, still has cold, still has nights that feel endless. And people still need to know they can make it through. Still need to know they're strong enough. Still need to know that morning comes. The candle is still burning, somewhere, in the stories we tell, in the movies we watch, in the cultural memory that knows what it takes to survive. We just need to tend it, keep it alive, pass it forward, so the next generation knows they're capable, knows they're strong, knows they can survive. That's the legacy. That's the lesson. That's what the candle left behind. Not fear, not trauma, but proof. The proof that you're stronger than you think, that you can survive hard things, that morning always comes. Keep the flame burning. That's all. That's everything.